turnout. So what is it like in Harare this morning?
Well, Sakina, very different from the scenes that we saw yesterday when you saw some of those members and supporters of the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance take to the street following the release of some of those results. We do know now that ZANU-PF does have a 2/3 majority in Parliament, but basically the tone had been set already several days or weeks ago when the tone for the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance already was that they were not going to accept any defeat in this particular election. So absolute scenes of violence that we saw in the city of Harare yesterday, with police deployed, and a bit later on the army also deployed in the streets to try and bring about law and order. But overnight we saw press conferences from the Department of Home Affairs as well as the Commissioner General stating that the army had been deployed basically on the basis that most police officers, you'd recall, had been deployed to various polling stations around the country, and that there had not been enough manpower on the streets once the situation itself had escalated. You'd know that the MDC Alliance members and supporters do believe that they've been cheated out of this election. Well, we've still got a far way to go in terms of the final tally of results, but the indications at this stage that ZANU-PF had won the majority seats in Parliament really got the MDC Alliance supporters and members quite ticked off. We also heard from the MDC Alliance yesterday saying that they don't know how the situation had escalated this way, but were very critical of the deployment of the army here in Harare. Once the situation had turned out, official confirmation, of course, from the police that 3 people had died in those clashes. We're not sure at this stage exactly how many others do remain injured. We'll try and get that information for you just a bit later on. But what we do know as well, developing overnight, is that the army and the police will continue to be deployed according to the authorities until the situation is calm. I think of concern at this stage is that while the results themselves trickle in and while the presidential results themselves have not been released as yet, what will the response then be from those who feel aggrieved by whichever party it is that's going to lose in this election? Let's just get some analysis now from Dr. Tawanda Zinyama, who's with the University of Zimbabwe. Dr. Zinyama, thank you very much for your time this morning. Certainly scenes that we saw yesterday here in Harare, quite worrying. Has that set the tone politically for what is expected in Zimbabwe while these results continue to trickle in?
Okay, let me just give a perspective or put the whole issue in the context. The actual tone was set well before during the campaigns, because the opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, is in the record saying we are not going to accept any results other than his victory. So what it means is the MDC Alliance had a predetermined position outcome. So what is now happening today? The results, they are saying, yes, the results are delayed. But constitutional, if you read section 98 of our constitution, it says results should be announced within 5 days from the election day. And the 5 days will lapse on a Saturday, the 4th of August. And they are not yet. Yes, the process might be very slow, but they were supposed to be very patient. Then another issue which is very critical again, the chairperson or the commissioner, Chigumba, yesterday, she invited the polling agents representing their presidential candidates to come forward with the V11 forms so that they can do the verification together. If there are any discrepancies, they can now negotiate and discuss what has caused that. But as I'm speaking right now, MDC Alliance has not yet took the V11 forms to the Chigumba. So the issue now is what they want. They want now, the threat of violence, whether pure or perceived, it is meant to achieve one thing, to make sure that you damage, you paralyze your opponents so that they can submit into a political social bargaining. So what is this social bargaining in this context? The social bargaining, it could be a government of national unity. They know that we have already lost. So how can we save our faces? Let's now have a GNU or a national transitional arrangement. But how can we bring this thing around? The only way is now to force these other parties, mainly ZANU-PF. Now it is clear that it has won the majority, 2/3. So how can we now negotiate with them? So let's now, because if you check, so far, of course, I have not confirmed, but there are some people who are saying they buzzed the people from the high density areas. And these people were given beer, drugs, etc. And even if you check what happened yesterday, as they were demonstrating, the police were just standing. They never blocked them. But when they realized that, the police are allowing them to do, as long as they are doing their demonstrations freely, without violence, that's when they resorted to now stoning cars, burning cars, looting shops, etc. Abusing now the democratic space, which is there. But it is their constitutional right to exercise, to demonstrate, to do ABCD. But it is also a criminal act to stone cars. We should desist as Zimbabweans. Let's give the whole electoral process a due process until it is concluded. Once the results are there, we have now the facts. And if there are any issues, we have the conflict resolution mechanisms in Zimbabwe. We have these courts, the legal process is there. Then they can approach them with their grievances, with the evidence, etc., so that the decisions can be made there.
Dr. Sinyama, amongst many of the questions that are being raised at this point is, was it necessary to bring in the army? Because we also saw a number of those tanks being deployed into the streets. Does that not escalate the situation to a certain degree?
Okay, the deployment of the army, yes, we do not need the involvement of the army per se in electoral, especially civilian issues. But let's take one thing into account. The bulk of the police officers are deployed outside Harare. So the police officers were overwhelmed by the demonstrators. So now what now the Commissioner General did was to seek assistance from the army to say, okay, we are overwhelmed and the situation might.
Well, unfortunately, we've lost that feed there to Harare in Zimbabwe, where our reporter Chriselda Lewis was speaking there to Dr. Sinyama, and he is, of course, from the University of Zimbabwe. Some very interesting analysis there, Leanne, and does pertain to our question of the day. So let's just recap what that question was. We asked you, should the result of the Zimbabwean presidential election be released early? And this is some of what you had to say.
All right, it's start off with Malube saying it should be released early. The more they delay, the more they are forging the results. ZEC and ZANU-PF always do that. I wonder when they will stop.
This one's from Kanisto. Kanisto says, we want to hear the outcome. They can protest. It won't change anything because already ZANU-PF was leading in a high percentage.
Offbat saying, if the results are out, why not announce them to the people so we know who is to lead Zimbabwe? Can the army please leave the civilians as they have done nothing wrong? All they want is results and maybe a change of leadership.
Simbarashe says the electoral body has up until Saturday to release the results according to the law, and I can't understand what's all the pressure coming from. And that's the point that Dr. Sinyama was also making.
Kailet is saying the results should be released earlier because violence seemed to be escalating since the vote counting began on Tuesday.
Tifo says leaders of the opposition party must take full responsibility for insisting the violence with their, or rather inciting, I think is what you mean, the violence with their reckless statement. None of the leaders got hurt or have been killed. It's so worrying.
Fit saying, let ZEC do its job. Why the impatience? We have a lot of people who are watching these elections and can't be all fooled to the extent the opposition is inciting the people of Zimbabwe. I call on leaders to practice responsible politics.
The land is ours says this criminality by soldiers. Who deployed the soldiers? Crimes against humanity being committed by coup makers determined to abuse the electoral process to justify their illegitimacy. God is in it. The lawlessness is happening under the noses of 4,500 international voters.
And this last one, I think it's Taffy, saying, is there any valid reason for keeping results if all procedures are done? They must be announced so that we can see what next.
And final word goes to Nepster, who says results will be released when they are ready and counted correctly, and party leaders must stop encouraging volatile atmospheres by negative assumption. So interesting there, those comments, and many questions still remain, and this is where the analysis will really come into its own.
I know, but I often put myself in that position, and we know, covering elections here in South Africa, what it's like. It's quite a swift process. You get the results, you vote, they get through to the IEC, they are counted, and then those votes start trickling in, very transparent on a board, everybody sees what's going on, and then they deliver to the people. But it's the uncertainty that causes problems, and then statements that come from various parties, and then the tension comes. So this is something that needs to be managed very, very carefully, and I'm not sure it's been managed well at all.
Absolutely. Well, let's come to your indicator.